On the Sideline, a podcast for coaches and aspiring coaches, where we share the best practices of coaching, interview with coaches, and experts in the field of coach education. Here's your host, Vin Blaine.
Welcome to another episode of On the Sideline. I'm your host, Vin Blaine. Today, I'll be discussing youth development with my special guest, Sam Gevaux. Sam is the current Director of Player and Coach Development with Waterloo United in Ontario, Canada. His previous role in the UK before moving to Canada was working with Hull City FC as an academic coach. Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining me on the sideline.
Thanks for having me, Vin. I really appreciate being on.
Well, I'm glad you have accepted my invitation. Today, we want to discuss youth development because I know your job is Director of Player and Coach Development at Waterloo United in Ontario, Canada. You're originally from the UK, right?
Yes, that's right.
Can you let me have an idea of what youth development entails?
I think youth development is so multifaceted that there's so many different layers that you need to think of when you're undertaking it. I think as a personal coach going on that journey of understanding youth development and putting together maybe a youth development program, it's important that you assess your own biases. An understanding of yourself is a critical first step, because your current understanding and your current knowledge will essentially trigger when you look at a player or you look at an individual. That's where your current views are coming into it. And it's important for you to understand why you think that and why you have that understanding. So for me, the first point of maybe putting together a youth development program or assessing a youth development program is continually finding research and coaches that challenge the ideas that you've put together to inform a youth development program. I think I'm almost always in a place where I'm teetering on the edge of uncertainty, because I think it keeps us searching for more information, knowledge and understanding. And just having a clear understanding of the individuals that you're working with. I think you truly need to understand their motivations, as that will give you greater tools to effectively not only deliver, design and facilitate an environment, but also to, I'd say, develop the opportunity to make efficient interventions, the way that you communicate with your athletes. You can adjust the way that you speak in relation to the knowledge that you have of your participants. So I think it's a really important step to understand the culture that you're going into. Obviously, being from the UK in a football background and a really football playing country, it's a different culture to when I came to Canada,
right.
and to Ontario. But I'm now in that environment. I've been here for 2.5 years, and it's given me I've taken all that time to really try and understand the culture. And it's not just Canada and it's not just Ontario, because it's different from city to city and region to region. So spending some time to really understand the cultural and historical information that all the players may be storing as individuals, but as a collective within the environment that you're in as well, is an extremely important first step.
I agree. And I just want to get back a bit, get into an area. I know you have is it a Master of Science, Sport Coaching?
Yeah, that's
right. In that degree program, how much emphasis did they pay to youth development?
It was very broad. It gave us a lot of opportunities to explore. It's the best thing I've done as a coach was undertaking the course. So a big thank you to Leeds Beckett University and their master's degree program and a lot of the staff there, because I think that was where it first put me on that edge of uncertainty in regards to developing such a things of youth development programs. We went through phases where we were developing analysis tools to assess not only what might be seen as technical solutions or actions to tactical problems, but also psychological support, social development, and also physiological development in relation to the demands of the sport. We explored developing a performance model in regards to the demands of the game, understanding the needs and wants of athletes within a performance model, and also understanding their motivation levels. Are they searching for an elite reference excellence, or are they participating for more fun? And that can be a variety across a youth development program, and it's very different. Going from a master's degree, I worked as well as an academy coach at Hull City. And again, that was a high performance environment where the players were participating in. My current role in the club that I'm in now, it's a very different situation in regards to you have your high performance athletes, and it goes all the way down to those that are recreational. Because that is the nature of the community clubs in Canada, which is a wonderful system. When we have a variety of motivational needs across a big range of youth development programs. So actually trying to understand their needs and wants is extremely difficult when you're trying to put together programs, because there is such a variance. So we really try and implore our coaches to understand the needs and wants of their individual athletes that they're working with within their daily environments.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned, I saw where you're an academy coach with Hull City. So coming to Canada, was it a culture shock? What you're coming from in the UK, which is predominantly a football society. Cricket, yes, but more football, right? So what kind of a cultural shift you had to make in your own approach to coaching youngsters?
Yeah, I think I really wanted to bring about, and it's not to say it wasn't already there, but I really wanted to bring in a player-centered approach. I really wanted to highlight that, because what I really found, I only spent 1 year coaching at Hull, but what I really found was the confidence of the players to speak up, to share their ideas, to share their thoughts, and that their opinions were valued and well thought of. And for me, that was a real insight into when I came into the club. To any coaching session in Canada, they were very much listening, and they were very engaged, and they were yearning for learning. They really wanted information, but I wanted to give them the opportunity to explore within that information, to find their own solutions. And I think it was important for me to adjust my approach to meet the needs and wants of the athletes, but also give them the opportunity to learn the demands of the game and explore the demands of the game, so that they were confident enough to be able to challenge and to give their own thoughts and perspectives on what we were doing within their development program. And
you think that coming to Canada, I know Canada has a fairly decent training program and academy programs. They have a lot of training going on in different Brampton, all those places they have training going on. What do you find, and give me your take on age-appropriate training? Was that in place when you got there, that they were doing age-appropriate training?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Canada has some phenomenal coach educators and some phenomenal coaches within a variety of their programs. You have some excellent leaders of the whole country. Jason DeVos overseeing development within all of Canada, and he's put together some brilliant programs that are age and stage appropriate and in relation to the needs and wants of the athletes, and very much a player-centered approach, which is excellent to see. And they've been doing that for quite some time, which is phenomenal to see. I'm very, very honoured to sort of be within that environment, and they are very forward-thinking, very progressive. You have Stuart Neely that oversees coach education throughout the whole country, and bringing in some just phenomenal changes and adaptations, and it's really exciting time, actually. I'm really excited to be in Canada during this phase.
Now, how important to the Canadian setup is the player-centered approach by coaches? And explain to my listeners, when you say player-centered approach, what is it you actually mean?
Yeah, sure. So I would say a player-centered approach is giving the players autonomy to be a large part of their development journey. It's involving the players in the decision-making processes. So it's, again, adjusting our approach to the needs and wants of the athletes. And that might be constructively aligning our learning structure, learning engagement, our coaching behaviours, and also the outcomes that we're setting to the needs and wants of the performers. I think within a player-centered approach, there tends to be an increased level of competence. So the players start to actually get better. And when that emerges, within that emerges sort of this specific confidence, so situation-specific confidence in relation to what I would say almost close to self-efficacy in relation to Bandura's work. But this also leads to individuals becoming a bit more resilient. So we've seen that within a player-centered approach, it's important. It gives them the opportunity to be resilient in pressure situations, which surely as coaches, when we're looking at the complexity of sport, but football or soccer specifically, the complexities and the demands of the game are it's so vast. 11, if it's 11v11 or even 5v5, there's so many complexities. So if we can get players to be a bit more resilient in their developing the skill actions, or actions that are responding to a stimulus, I think that's so important. And whilst the player-centered approach was fully in swing in my turn when I came to Canada, in my environment that I came into, and whilst it may have been implemented at some points, I just noticed that the players that I was particularly working with were very much, they wanted to listen. They really wanted to take in information from the coach. I wanted to hear from them. I wanted to understand what their needs were, what their wants were. And it may have been, again, we always say that it's an English coach that's come into North America. It must be all knowledge, and that doesn't mean that. It just doesn't. And it's really important that I wanted to share with them that I was vulnerable. I was willing to learn with them. Yes. I wanted to be open. And I think there's something that gets misgiven with a player-centered approach is it's not player-led coaching. It's a player-centered approach. There is a difference, and I think there is space for a player-led coaching within an environment. I have to say there was a session that I ran before, obviously this all started, where we started off with a regular warm-up with dynamic action, dynamic stretches, and then we went into sort of an activation activity where there's lots of finishing, and I intended to progress and move on to my positional game, my positional activity, and a small-sided game. The players were enjoying this activity so much, and I just couldn't bring myself to moving them on, because I would have been moving them on for me.
Yes.
And it wasn't an adult or coach-led approach. It was their approach. And they were just getting so much out of it. And they'd had a tough week. It'd been a long week at school. So taking in their cognitive load that they were managing and the stresses that they were undertaking at school, it was okay in that time and moment to just go, you know what, this is working for them. And maybe not for me. I'm thinking, oh man, I want to go on to this next thing. But for them, it was working. And I think that's where, within a player-centered approach, there needs to be role models for players. So for me, it was all right to be. I failed in regards to meeting my session plan that I've set up to hit all these objectives or targets or principles, tactics in relation to the game's demands. But it was okay. It was okay for me to step back. And I said that to them. I said that to them at the end of the session. Right. I said I was planning for more, but you were enjoying that so much, and you were telling me you wanted to go another round. You loved it. And for me, that was okay. It was okay on that day. It was okay to do that.
I love that approach, because as long as learning was taking place, that is, and no matter what, informal games, learning take place. Because when I started to play on the streets, what we call a breadfruit in Jamaica, right, that we eat. But it's hard enough to play, and it's round, so learning takes place there. So I like that approach, and I think that's the future of coaching. But I want to get back to the player-centered coaching, because player-centered coaching mostly means, giving the players ownership to what they're doing in the session. Now, as I know, that in an environment at the US and Canada, Jamaica, anywhere that youth football is being played, parents are there. How do you control a parent now around your club that is trying to tell their son what to do and their daughters what to do, and moving away from what we want as player-centered? How do you handle that in an environment?
Now, this is a really interesting one, because you've got to involve the parents in the decision-making process as well. So I think that's where it's vital. Where when we're talking about a player-centered approach, it's important for the player, but the player's main guardian or main support and main resource is their parents. So it's important for us to give the parents the idea as to why we're potentially utilising this approach. Obviously, the theory and science that's backing this approach, and again, I think there's a misgivings on what coaching is. Mm-hmm. It tends to be, and there's a wonderful video that I saw on a coaching course, and it was called the Magic Kit or the Magic Shirt, and it was in relation to these young athletes playing a variety of sports, where they basically give that opportunity to make mistakes, but then when it comes to the weekend, when I pull on my kit or I pull on my uniform, all of a sudden I become a professional athlete, and I'm treated so differently. And I think it was such a great video, and it just summed it up brilliantly, because when it goes further to the game, all of a sudden this adultification happens, and it becomes about the coach. It becomes about the parents. And I think a simple analogy for capturing that concept, or how they've adjusted to that concept, when you look at what the Belgium FA did, when they started to implement small-sided games for longer during the duration, for the match days, for the duration of the youth development period, because when you look at why we were going to 11v11, the rationale was for adults. If we're going to 11v11 too early. And what you can see now in Canada, in England, in a lot of countries, where we're now going to smaller games at younger ages, so that they get the opportunity to perform multiple actions, variety of actions, and you can see that the game's biggest form at the 11v11, current research would say that you can actually see all the decisions that would be made in a 5v5 scenario anyways. I know that KNVB, the Dutch national FA, did research on that so that they could assess decisions that were made within that environment. So it can be done. So I think when you look at the way that they did it, and they didn't take the physical priority to, okay, we're just going to have this team because they're physically developed. The Belgium FA also have a team that isn't physically developed, and they're giving them the same coaching, the same processes, the same opportunities to develop. And I think when we're doing it and it becomes an adultification of the sport, that's where there's misgivings, and that's where we lose track that it is a player-centered approach, and it becomes an adult-centered approach or a coaching-centered approach. And that's where there's certainly some difficulty. It seems to happen the most on match days. It seems to be that's where it comes to life.
Definitely. That's when they start getting crazy.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, to the detriment of the players' performance. So we know we have player-centered approach and we have the coach-centered approach. What role do you think that coach-centered approach plays? What role does it play, you think, in the development of the youngsters?
I think before I go to a coach-centered approach, I think there's also misgivings about a player-led approach where like the coach is just a facilitator and just a stand back. The coach is the architect of the environment, the architect of the training structure, and I don't think a player-led approach means that the coach is never speaking to a player, or the coach is never offering some verbal guidance, or a player that's just not confident to play with their left foot, and you give them an additional challenge. So you're now essentially saying a verbal constraint. So if you can score with your left foot, you get 5 goals. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, there's a want, there's a motivation, there's a task, there's a challenge that they'll be relating to. But a coach-centered approach would be that you're doing it for the needs of the coach, where you're potentially putting the needs or the wants of the coach at the first and foremost, at the front. I don't think they can be separated to an extent. I think a player-centered approach, it involves the coach. Mm-hmm. It involves the coach being not just the facilitator, but the architect of the environment and the training environment, and putting that constructive alignment together of the needs and wants of the athletes, of the demands of the sport, of the behaviours that the coach is going to utilise. So whether it be specified questioning, guided questioning, are you using specific praise, are you using silence to assess how your team is efficiently communicating with one another, or just adjusting and adapting to the environment without any of your input? Or are you, again, giving some feedback? Are you giving some information? Are you giving a guidance? Because obviously, as soon as you start talking, you will start to constrain certain actions that they undertake. And there are historical and cultural aspects that will essentially affect the actions that the players will undertake as well. And that could be in relation to how they grew up. Maybe their dad or their mum or their brother or sister really loves football and talks about certain players, so they start to emulate those certain players, or they just love a player themselves. So there's certain things that you need to consider within that. But a coach-centered approach, I don't see it as a bad word. I just think I think you can use it for obviously organising the structure and organising the opportunities for learning and growth. But I think it still delves back into a player-led approach and putting the player or the performer at the forefront.
Right. You see, there's a time and place, a coach-centered approach, for sure. But I prefer to call it a coach-led, player-centered approach.
That might sum it up well.
Because that's what it is. You are there to guide them, so why not? I think what it means, and I want young coaches to understand, because a lot of terminologies are coming to football. No, constraint, which we're going to talk about, player-centered approach, and I don't want young coaches to believe, well, it's a laissez-faire coach that you want to develop into. You just let it go. Yes, guided discovery is good, but how do you guide them? You have to set the platform for them to understand where they're going. So, player-centered approach I love, because I've experienced coaches in the Caribbean shouting at players. I'm sure it happens in the UK, I'm sure it happens in Canada, I'm sure it happens in the US and all over the world, where coaches are shouting to the players to pass, to the detriment of the development of players. There's no thinking going on. And so there's a time and place for everything. So during your talk just now, you mentioned constraints approach twice. So that's one of the areas I wanted us to discuss, because it's trending now. Explain to me from your experience, when you talk about constraints approach, what do you mean?
So the way I see a constraints-led approach is a framework in which to view, analyze, explain the actions that they'd be undertaking within the sport at any particular moment, and the variety of solutions that they may find to the problems that are in front of them. There was an excellent review on the implementation of a constraints-led approach by a coach and a researcher named Ben Franks, who recently put his work on Twitter, and he did a brilliant job. So I won't delve too deep into ecological dynamics, because I think I'd butcher it compared to how great of a job Ben did. But it's certainly a framework that allows you to constructively align your learning design with the demands of the sport. I think the thing is, if people think that constraints-led approach is sort of a step back approach, that is where there's such a misunderstanding, because you need to have such a deep understanding of the game and the demands of the game and the needs and wants of your athletes to develop not only session structure, learning structure, but also potential interventions and strategies to communicate and converse with your athletes, and to allow behaviors to emerge within your session design and within your learning design. I certainly think it's more than just manipulating constraints to allow for actions to emerge within an environment, but it's understanding how to utilize these constraints at times, which is misunderstood. So I think you've mentioned a really good one there, Vin, in regards to coaches putting the stipulations of a one touch. So over constraining actions, so over constraining or putting too many constraints, it leads to the action being undertook not being realistic to the game. There's no relevancy to the action. So constraints should allow a variance of actions to emerge, and it should help the team move towards the goal or the challenge that is being set. So if we think of, for example, a positional rondo. So everyone knows what rondo is, or most people know what a rondo is, but positional, we've framed it, we've referenced it. It's not just a piggy in the middle. We're focusing on creating gaps and then incisive movements, but then also positioning to protect possession. So we're positioning to think, okay, if we lose it in this phase, we're in a situation where we can regain it. But then you limit the players to playing on the outside of the square. There's a problem there. So you might say, well, I'm trying to space them out. But now I'm saying, but the ball's traveled to this space and time. Would this player potentially come closer to the ball to help secure or support? So you've now over-constrained to a point where you've eliminated the realism. If you put the constraint that you just said on, Vin, there where you go, well, you can only use one touch, you can only pass with one touch, because you say, because I really want the opposition to press quickly. Well, why would I press quickly if they've only got one touch?
Right.
I would just wait until there's a moment where they take the bad touch and then they do the little dance around the ball that never happens. And then you win the ball there. Yeah. So for me, it's about how you apply those constraints. And again, I want to mention other people's work, because there's been so many fantastic people that have put together research on this. But Ben Bartlett, who was part of the English FA,
yes,
but I believe is at Fulham now. He did an excellent job at creating a framework of constraints with examples of how to manipulate them, but just adjusting the parameters, which doesn't necessarily need to be just the size, but also the shape. So you can get certain behaviors to emerge if you adjust the shape of the action. And it's not just the movement of the player adjusting to the shape, but it might be the pass that essentially is trying to guide them in the way that the shape is informing them to move. But he had these four constraints that you can play with. So the boundaries, and then he looked at the restrictions that you could put on. So it may be restrictions such as you're working on building through zone 1, zone 2, or the defensive third. And then you're looking at, okay, my pressing shape, but what I want to bring out is a more of a mid to low block. So you may restrict some of the opposition to playing in certain roles on the pitch. Obviously, you are eliminating some of the realism, but you're putting together what may happen in the strategical sense when you're playing against that opposition. That may be for slightly older players, but you can still put it on and adjust those constraints so there's a variance of actions occurring. So you may then alleviate some of those constraints that brings out different behaviors and then different solutions for the players to find. And then he spoke about reward and relate. So rewarding the actions that you are searching for. So it could be as simple as, again, we're looking at the building phase. If you can play through the deep line midfielder, and you might say this just to the team, if you can play through your deep line midfielder, and then you go and score into one of the gates or into one of the goals, into one of the end zones, you score double points. What that will then do to the opposition is narrow their approach because they don't want you to play through the deep line midfield.
Right.
So you're essentially constraining the behaviours of the opposition. So they start to act in a different way. So they start to go, well, I'm not letting you through there. I'm not letting you score two goals now. So now they have to find different solutions. Can they find a ball that skips 2 lines and breaks into the central midfielder who can hopefully turn and play forwards? And then you might put, okay, well, we want to play centrally. So instead of having 3 goals that we've outlined that are inverted, we want to try and receive the ball and turn into that area. So instead of having goals, I'm going to put an end zone in place. So again, you've just adjusted the task constraints, or you've adjusted the boundaries or the way that they score.
Right.
And this will essentially adjust what behaviours will emerge within that without us saying you must turn forwards in this situation. But again, at times, that's a constraint as well. In those situations, I would like you, Sam or Vin, to try and receive forwards. Right away, you are using an instructional constraint. Yeah, yes. Absolutely. And you can use those reference points as constraints as well. And that's not a bad thing. I think when you go back to that coach-led, player-led, that is a point of reference, right, where a coach is giving some feedback because the coach is the one that has knowledge that is willing to share. But the players also have knowledge. And they have different knowledge, and we want them to get to a point where they can implicitly take in that information. Like we mentioned earlier, if we're undertaking a player-led approach where they're being involved in the decision-making process, they're going to be far more successful when times get tough in performing those actions and undertaking those actions. So if they can implicitly learn those actions, it's extremely important. But I think, like you said, not over-constraining, because we don't want to eliminate the realism or the representativeness of the design.
In a constraint approach, what does transition play in that?
Transitional phase of the game?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So I think within a constraints-led approach, whenever you're designing an activity, a positional game, whatever you may use as the terminology, there needs to be all 4 moments of the game present, because that's the demands of the game. I think if you start to dwindle down too much and you break it off too much, and again, like you mentioned, been time and place for everything, but if you break it down too much, it then isn't the game anymore. So there needs to be an opportunity within that, and it may not be the highlight or the focus, or it may be the highlight or the focus, but again, you can constrain certain areas of the game, or even just with a goal or a task. Like you mentioned, some level of free play. But if I said, okay, we're going to start off today with a 5v5, but if you regain and score within 8 seconds, you get 5 goals. That is going to shape some of the behaviours that emerge within that, both for the opposition, so that they're going to go, well, I'm going to counter press if it's onto. It's not onto counter press. Okay, I'm going to deny the key spaces, and then we'll defend when the ball comes closer. So all of a sudden, you're starting to shape that just with one task constraint, one reward that you're putting on. So I think it can be a huge part of any area of the game. And like I said, I think it's a framework, and I think it's a framework that every single coach has been utilizing without maybe having the term for it.
Yes, it brings me to ask you this question, because constraint approach, is it the same old terminology if we were to say condition games?
I think there's elements that do apply. I wouldn't say it's not teaching games for understanding. There is differences. There is differences around that, where you can have a representative task design without it necessarily looking exactly like the game. It has to look like the actions that would occur within the game. But that's where there's a lot of argument about directional and multi-directional activities within sessions and the validity of that. I think what you can see is you might see a young athlete, and all you want them to do is find the opportunity to create gaps and invade space with the ball. So you might have 10 players with the ball playing in an area of 20 by 20, and you've got 2 taggers. There you go. So all of a sudden, you're now trying to evade the attacker, break into the space that they're not available in. So that would be utilizing a constraints-led approach as a framework. But for someone that's watching and going, well, I thought I came to watch a football game, that wouldn't look like that. It wouldn't.
Yes.
And I'm not saying you may do that with all ages, but it's important for us to understand that it doesn't always have to look exactly like the game, as long as the actions are representative of the game's demands and the actions that you would undertake within the game. So if you're looking at, obviously rondos were the highly contested conversation point from a few different countries that decided whether to use it or not. But you can get a lot of value out of that. You can get a lot of value out of a multi-directional activity. But you have to be cautious of, again, how the opposition is responding to that. Because if it gets to a point where the opposition isn't responding realistically anymore, then you may need to adjust some of the task constraints.
Yes. All right. So let's get back a little bit to the player-centered approach. I'm going to ask you a direct question and you can expand on it. Do you think a player-centered approach encourages the youngsters to develop their cognitive skills and confidence? You think that really enhances that? Absolutely.
So within a player-centered approach, embedding reflection, embedding being able to reflect as a peer. Because as we know, when you get to the 13, 14, 15, 16, their peer approval becomes extremely important. But if they've been given the tools to reflect, to share effectively, and they've got a greater understanding of the game's demands, those conversations become extremely enriching for their player experience. Being given the opportunity to feed back in relation to the design of the session and the design of the learning is, again, extremely important and can humble most coaches. I think I've certainly been in a position where I've delivered a session, a learning moment, and thought, well, that was brilliant. That brought out all the design, all the tasks I needed to. It related to our performance model. It brought out all these elements, and I've gone, well, how did you find it? Oh, I didn't like that one. I didn't like that one. I didn't like this bit. I didn't like that bit. And it opens your eyes. And again, I noted something down that I wanted to say, and it's leave your ego at the door. So when you're coming in for a player-led approach, leave your ego at the door, because coaches know a lot. There's phenomenal coaches out there with a tremendous amount of knowledge that needs to be shared in appropriate ways to players, or could be shared in an appropriate way. But it's important to give players the tools to feedback, and that we can all be honest with each other. So if we're expecting them to answer questions in small groups, individual reflections, maybe as part of a tactical discussion or the strategical discussion, it's important for them to be able to feel safe, and it's important for them to be able to potentially fail. So that's what we need to do as a role model within a player-centered approach.
Yeah. There's one question I wanted before I move on to another area I wanted to. But I know there are lots of talk about a game model. And to me, at a younger age, what age you think that a game model, at a youth development level, right? Or what age you think that you can probably start looking at a game model?
I think it depends at how you look at it. So when I first started exploring the idea of what is now called a game model more consistently, it was understanding the performance model. So the performance model encaptured the culture, the needs and wants, also the demands of the sport, before delving into what the demands of the game were, maybe breaking it into 4 moments, maybe periodizing it tactically and also physiologically, and then spiraling it in a curriculum so that you're continually revisiting and building upon certain concepts. So I think it can be introduced at the earliest stages, but it's how you introduce it.
Yes.
You would use it to inform your decisions as a coach. You wouldn't necessarily utilize it to teach. So you're using it as the ability to inform you how you want to teach, how you want to design practice, and how you want to inform. And then as they get older, you can obviously start trickling out information. And I don't think most coaches develop a game model to then share that exact game model with their players and go, understand this. I think they develop it to sort of generate their understanding of the way that they want to play within the tactics and the principles of the game.
Right.
And then the way that it needs to be taught within, it could be in the framework of a constraints-led approach or of a variation of approaches, and then how they might structure that learning over a period of time, but obviously with reflection and adjustment points throughout, because the needs and wants of the athletes will change and adapt. And I've certainly been rigid in the past with the curriculum, and we're doing certain things. I said that 6 months ago because it meets the needs and wants of the current age and stage appropriate development models. But really, we know that individuals and individual groups develop at a variance of rates. So having those points in your curriculum, within your game model, your performance model, where you can adjust, reflect, and go back and adapt, because I don't think any coach out there would say their game model or performance model is finished. I think everyone's never. We're continually finishing, and I think I said at the beginning, I'm certainly always teetering on that moment of uncertainty, and it's a place that can be a bit overwhelming at times. You think, how didn't I think of that? Or I've just seen a presentation. There's some unbelievable presenters out there at the minute with the current crisis. The amount of information that has been shared and that is out there is a little bit overwhelming. But it's amazing that the coaches have been willing to share, which has been tremendous.
Yes.
But it gives you that opportunity to go, wow, I'm really uncertain about this now. Something that I was certain about a minute ago, you've just made me uncertain about again. So now I can delve into it and go, why am I uncertain? What are those moments? I think that uncertainty creates that gap in knowledge, and in that gap, you either delve through it or you fall in it. Yeah. And if you can dive through it and experience it and learn within it, I think it's a really powerful place to be, as long as you feel safe to be there.
Yes. Yesterday, you mentioned Ben Bartlett earlier on. Yesterday, I happened to be listening to a podcast that he was on, and he made an interesting comment, and I want to get your view on it, because what he was saying made sense to me. When we talked about principles of play, he was saying that it's not that important. He was saying that learning is adaptation to experience. I thought that was a profound statement from somebody with so much experience. Because he was saying that, yes, you're talking about principles of play, but you're looking at these kids, it depends on the competition. These youngsters are playing 7v7, some play 5v5, and it's the experience that they get in that, and the competition rules. That was a lot important. I throw this on you very quickly, but I never give you time to think about it. But just from what I'm saying, you think that has some credibility to it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think the principles of the game, or the tactics of the sport, they should be the same. They should be the same throughout.
Right.
So they should be, if they've been explored and explained in an efficient manner, they should always be there. I think, again, similar to CLA, it's sometimes misinterpreted. So I think from the statement that you've just made that Ben Bartlett said, I think the adaptation of a variety of skills in relation to maybe the same problem.
Right.
So having the flexibility to adapt. So it might be that I'm going to dribble to attract. So I'm attracting that player with a dribble. The next time, same situation, I'm going to use a pass or one-two combination to break past them.
Exactly.
And that's more in relation to the space, the boundaries, the opposition, your teammates, and the ball. So those reference points never change. They can be adapted, but they're always there. They're always prevalent in the game. So again, when you go into maybe a constraints-led approach or session design or something like that, where possible, try and make sure those reference points are there as much as possible.
And sometimes to do with your playing philosophy, you don't think?
Yeah, so I think when you go, philosophy is a really broad term. Like philosophy, I see a lot of people say coaching philosophy, and obviously that's a term that's been about for ages. I think because philosophy is the search for knowledge, the search for understanding, or your understanding of the world, or your understanding of the questions, the unanswerable questions at times. So I think having your philosophy is your search for understanding within the sporting context, the demands of the game, the needs and wants of your athletes, how to better communicate, how to better structure, and you're always searching for more efficient answers. There's maybe never an answer. I think so. Having an identity, a playing identity or style, is just how you play within the tactics or the principles of the game, or within those 5 relational points. So that's where, again, it's important to assess your understanding of the sport's demands, your own bias why you want to play certain ways or why you want certain moments to occur. But like we just mentioned, that point, so the players received it and they might dribble to attract or combine to break through. So it might be my principle or my style or my idea is I'm going to try and create as many opportunities for us dribble to attract so I can alleviate space behind the line of pressure. That might be my idea. So the players that play for me might utilize that skill action or football action more often than the combination to break pass. Ideally, I'd want them to be able to have a variance of that, and that they can find not just their own solutions that are guided, but their own solutions as well, so that they are pressure resistant in that moment, so that they can evade that pressure, but also deal with the scenario of, oh, actually, my combining player that was there last time is 2 yards slightly further back. I'm never going to be able to make the running behind before the defender closes him down. What am I going to do now?
Right.
Yeah, and they have that pressure resistance. Well, I know, I've explored that. I've done that situation a million times. I've got a million answers to that question.
Yes.
So yes. That's how I see maybe a playing identity or style coming to life within that. But it's certainly how you play and interact within the tactics of the sport and the demands of the sport. The things that we can't argue. The game is 90 minutes. If it's 11v11, it's a professional, and the width, obviously the length and width can change slightly, but there's always boundaries. There's always offside, and we need to understand that we have to play within those demands too.
Beautiful. All right, so we've gone through quite a few things about development. There's one area that I really wanted you to touch on, and it's a periodization, a tactical periodization within a youth program.
I think it's tricky with youth development. So with the tactical periodization research it gears you up to play the game at the end of the week. So it's gearing you up for an opposition. So there is obviously a time and place for that within a youth development program. It depends, obviously, as they get older and older, the opposition becomes more and more important, and we get more and more data on the opposition as well, so that we can utilize that to plan. But for me, a tactical periodization approach essentially allows us to focus on key principles, sub-principles, and sub-principles within that. So the key principles will relate to how we want to perform within the moments of the game, within the tactics of the game, within the demands of the sport as well. And that's how that you can layer it in. I've personally layered it in within a spiral curriculum approach so that we continually revisit those ideas and we expand upon them. And we might just play it in a different way. So if we do a building initiation or building consolidation idea, all 4 moments of the game will be prevalent. There'll always be a sub-principle that we'd be focusing on. There'll be individual concepts that we're trying to work towards. So for the individual players, so we don't miss out those. And it's also important that we have a counter focus so that we're, again, working to maximize our time on the pitch, but also to ensure that is it realistic to what we're working towards? So if we're looking at a building initiation, do they explore against a high press? Do they explore against a medium block? Do they explore when they press with a flat front three and a flat mid three? And that can obviously adapt to if you're playing 11v11, 9v9 or 7v7. I predominantly work with 11v11 and U13 to U16, but we also obviously at the club have between U8 to U21. So it's a variance within that, and it's essentially utilizing your performance model and your ideals about the game, your style or your identity, to bring that out periodically and expand upon the information. But again, in relation to the cognitive load of the players, the physical load of the players that need to be considered when you're setting your sessions, because obviously we can manage game days or game day -1, game day -2. If you've got 2 game days in a week, we utilize that to manage the physical load of the players. And then the types of activities that we would build and the size of the activities that we would build. But then that still has to allow the certain concepts to come out as well, which is obviously extremely important within that phase. But it's something that I've definitely tried to implement at youth development phase. I'd love to get more information on it again and be in that level of uncertainty so I can explore it a little bit deeper. But I think it's a really interesting idea to be able to implement a tactical periodization approach, but I think it does need to be intertwined with a variance of ideas, and a curriculum should be flexible. There might be some objectives and goals that you're searching to achieve, but again, that it needs to be process focused. We need to focus on being able to support the journey towards meeting those goals, both as individuals and as a team. And I think it's really important that we really understand the demands of the sport. You have to have a really deep understanding of the sport's demands to be able to implement both tactical periodization and the constraints-led approach that we obviously spoke about earlier.
But tactical periodization, what is the ideal age you think you should probably implement that? Or introduce that, I should say.
I'd say it's another tricky question.
Yes,
because
I have those.
You have plenty of them. I don't know if there is an age where you say, because I think we get muddled up when we say, well, there needs to be more skill. We need to work on this skill, or we need to work on this technique. Yes. I think we get muddled up there. So if we're working on, today our U8s are working on invading space. Mm-hmm. That's a good game. You're trying to invade. So that might look very different to, okay, I've got my U21s and they're looking to invade. That's a very different session. Yes, but they're still doing the same thing. So for me, a tactical periodization, or the concept of it, can go right to the earliest ages, but it's the way that you deliver the information. Again, I think we do get caught up a little bit and going, well, today's on dribbling.
Yes.
Today's on passing, and it's like, well, that's quite a singular action. That's very singular. Yeah. And for one, that might get a little bit boring, and for two, you've already given them the answer to the problem. So if we're trying to invade space, you might invade it by dribbling, and that might be the key focus or the underlying focus. But you also might invade it by passing.
Yes.
And that's okay. At U8, again, like we said, ideally we give them a chance to explore with the ball, and there might be loads of people on the ball, and then we start adding in taggers. And you might manipulate how the taggers interact. So you might say, okay, well, we have a physical development point here of we want them to learn how to move and balance and adjust. So we're going to make them hop as taggers.
Yes.
And all of a sudden we change it. Or you give them a ball as well. So the defenders have a ball too. Right. So they're doing different things. So again, that for me is a task constraint. And that's a constraints-led approach within maybe a tactical framework or an idea of we should always be looking to explore how the game is played and how we can be as efficient as possible within the game's moments.
Okay. We are at the end of our talk, but before you leave, I want you to give me an overview of youth development. What are some of the important things that young coaches should bear in mind when they're developing youngsters at the early age? I'm talking now up to maybe 12, between the ages of maybe 8 to 12 to 14. What are some of the areas that they should really pay attention to as young coaches?
Remember, it's fun. Mm-hmm. Remember, it should be fun for athletes. We play the game because we love the game. Right. Same as you coach the game because you love the game. That's got to be the first and foremost. I think we do forget that at times when we want to be the next little Guardiola or the next Mourinho. That they don't care about that. So I think, again, I think it's an old saying, but they don't care about how much you know until you show them how much you care. And really try and build those initial connections with them and really try and understand why they're playing the sport, especially in countries that maybe soccer isn't the predominant sport. And they may be playing because their mum or dad dropped them off. So how can you develop a love of the game? Mm-hmm. How can you bring that out in them? How can you create a moment where they go, well, of course I want to go back to soccer because Coach Johnny's phenomenal. Coach Johnny really creates a great environment for me to be a part of. And being able to give them the chance to reflect, even at the youngest ages, give them the chance. Be cautious with that. You don't want them to be talking your ear off for 60 minutes of the session, but you want to give them the opportunity to input. You want to give them the opportunity to find solutions, explore solutions, and variable solutions. Don't get too caught up on winning, losing scores. That will come at a far later time. It's important to give them the opportunity to be competitive, to enjoy winning, to live with losing, in a safe environment to do both, and be there to support them. Be there to support them throughout their journey.
It's good to talk to you. We got some good information. I hope young coaches will take something from this and recognize it's not a lecture, but it's just ideas and little nuggets reaching out to coaches, right? So once again, I want to thank you for coming on, Sam. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. I appreciate your time.
As coaches, you should have a better idea of how to implement a youth development program. Join me next time when my special guest will be Hope Powell, a trendsetter in women's football in the UK.
Thanks for listening. If you found value in the show, please share with your friends. We'd love to hear your views. So if you haven't already done so, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. Make sure to visit our website at onthesideline.net, where you can access coaching sessions and more.